"I can read this, Sir," said the maid's son. The millionaire laughed, but in the end he was speechless. In a night of luxury and arrogance, everyone believed Clara Mendez would be humiliated forever. But a simple forgotten note and a boy's innocent voice would change the course of a billion-dollar empire. What began as public scorn would become the biggest turning point of her life, and no one in that room would ever forget what was about to happen. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel now to help us bring you more moving stories that impact lives. Thank you. The heavy silence in the crystal ballroom of the Aurora Grand Hotel was broken by a voice that cut through the air like a blade. "This wedding is officially off," declared Tycoon Dominic Harlow, rising to his feet before more than 200 high society guests. The glasses clinked in midair, the piano ceased its soft melody, and all eyes turned to the most powerful man of the evening. His son, the young heir Adrian Harlow, swallowed hard, unable to react, while the bride, Clara Mendez, remained motionless, her bouquet nearly falling from her trembling hands. It was supposed to be the most important day of her life, but in seconds it transformed into a spectacle of humiliation. The audience could hardly believe what they were hearing. A millionaire union dissolved in public, in front of business people, politicians, and journalists who packed the ballroom. Dominic didn't stop there. With cold eyes and a voice filled with contempt, he added, "This young woman should never have set foot among us. She has no surname, no fortune, no place among my family." Murmurs filled the audience, and a few malicious chuckles echoed among the golden columns of the hall. Clara felt her heart race, but she remained erect, trying not to shed a tear. The tycoon's words were like knives, tearing not only her dignity, but also the hope she had carried until that moment. Adrian, unable to look his bride in the eye, lowered his eyes, showing cowardice under his father's pressure. The embarrassment was overwhelming, and the party that was supposed to celebrate a bright future was becoming the stage for an emotional ruin foretold. A more daring guest, laughing loudly, completed the scene. "Did you really think the Harlow family would mix their blood with that of a seamstress?" Laughter rippled through the air, heightening the cruelty of the moment. Clara felt her legs tremble, but took a deep breath. She didn't know it yet, but that moment of humiliation would be the turning point of her entire life. What no one in the room imagined was that, behind that seemingly defenseless figure, lay a hidden truth capable of toppling empires. The bouquet slipped slightly from her hands, and the camera flashes captured her firm expression. The audience watched, hungrily, as what seemed like the downfall of an ordinary woman. But they were only just beginning to witness the unexpected rise of Clara Mendez, a rise that would forever change the fate of the Harlow family. Clara Mendez's eyes burned, but not with tears of weakness. It was a mixture of indignation and shame at being exposed before so many. She had dreamed of this moment for months, imagining the white dress sliding across the ballroom carpet, the admiring glances, the kiss sealing her union with Adrian Harlow. Instead, she heard venomous murmurs and stifled laughter that pierced her like thorns. Every word of contempt echoed within her, reminding her of all the times she had helped her mother, a seamstress, work late into the night to pay for school. Clara had come not from luxury, but from sacrifice. And now, on the cruelest stage possible, she was treated as if she were nothing. The embroidered dress that should have represented purity and hope seemed to weigh tons, transformed into a symbol of mockery. Adrian, motionless beside her, only confirmed what the guests were silently murmuring. He wasn't man enough to defend her. His eyes avoided hers, as if Clara's presence were a mistake that should never have happened. The betrayal came not only from her father-in-law, but from her fiancé himself, who remained cowardly silent while his father destroyed the dignity of the woman he was supposed to protect. Clara felt each second dragging on like an eternity, but something unexpected was beginning to blossom within her, a silent fire, fueled by injustice. The flickering lights of the ballroom, which had once made her feel like a princess, now only revealed how cruel the elite who thought themselves untouchable could be. It was at that moment that, from the back of the room, a childish voice interrupted the chorus of humiliations. It wasn't a voice of authority, nor of prestige. It was an innocent, firm, and curious tone, that of Lucas Rivera, the hotel maid's son, who held in his hands a small note that had fallen from Clara's purse. His mother, Marina Rivera, tried to pull it back, embarrassed, but the boy insisted. "Is this important?" he asked aloud, with the innocence of someone unaware of the weight of the words he was about to utter. The guests turned away in irritation. Some laughed, others grumbled at the boldness. But within that piece of paper lay the secret capable of turning the evening upside down. And no one yet knew that the Harlow family's fate was about to change forever. The room, already filled with mockery, became even more cruel when one of the groom's aunts, Eleanor Harlow, raised her champagne glass and said aloud what many were whispering. "Poor man's clothes don't hide the lack of noble blood." The venom-laden phrase echoed like a gunshot. Laughter rippled through the room, reinforcing the feeling that Clara was nothing more than an intruder in this gilded universe. Some guests laughed openly, others merely smiled contemptuously, but everyone contributed to the humiliating spectacle. Clara, taking a deep breath, lifted her face and fixed her eyes on Adrian, searching for any sign of courage or solidarity in him. But what she found was silence. The cowardly silence of someone who preferred to protect their own status rather than defend the one they claimed to love. Clara Mendez felt each word like a branding iron branded into her skin. The white dress, sewn by her mother before she passed away, was now the target of veiled criticism and mocking glances. A group of young heiresses pointed to the simple embroidery on the hem and laughed, as if it were proof of their inferiority. The humiliation became a public spectacle, and Dominic, satisfied, stood before the room, as if he had won a power struggle. For him, it was more than canceling a wedding. It was showing that no one would dare tarnish the Harlow name. However, behind that arrogant gaze, there was something the tycoon could not control. The courage budding in Clara and the innocent spark growing in the young Lucas, without him fully realizing the impact of his actions. As the guests laughed, Lucas Rivera moved ever closer to the center of the room, clutching the small note he'd found. His mother, Marina, desperately tried to call him back. "Lucas, stay out of this." But the boy, with his disarming naivete, lifted the paper and said in a clear voice, "I can read this." The entire room fell silent for a moment, before bursting into even louder laughter. "The maid's son wants to play translator," mocked Harold Vexley, one of Dominic's partners. The laughter spread like wildfire, but no one realized that what Lucas held was no ordinary piece of paper. Within that note lay the key to dismantling the Harlow family's arrogance and turning the entire power play of that evening upside down. The small piece of paper Lucas Rivera held seemed insignificant to the guests, but it carried a weight no one could have imagined. Crumpled, with firm handwriting and international bank stamps, the note had discreetly fallen from Clara Mendez's purse the moment Dominic canceled the wedding. Clara, stunned by humiliation, hadn't even noticed the loss. Now, however, the document was in the hands of a 12-year-old boy, the maid's son, who would never have imagined being the center of attention in a room full of millionaires. The silence after his innocent statement was brief, broken by laughter and venomous comments. No one suspected that that sheet of paper could decide the fate of a fortune. Marina Rivera, desperate, tried to snatch the note from her son's hands, but Lucas escaped and ran to the front, right in front of Tycoon Dominic Harlow. His eyes shone with ingenuity and courage, and his voice echoed firmly, "It's important, sir. I can read this." The guests laughed even louder, some clapping mockingly, transforming the scene into a cruel spectacle. Dominic, impatient, stepped forward and took the paper from the boy's hands, ready to tear it up in front of everyone. "This is trash," he said arrogantly, raising the note in the air. But before he could destroy the document, Clara reacted. With a choked but firm voice, she pleaded, "Please don't do this. This paper doesn't belong to you." The hall fell silent for the second time that night. Clara's face hardened, and her eyes, previously filled with tears, now shone with unexpected determination. Everyone present sensed the change. Something was hidden behind that note, something that could shake the Harlow family's power. Intrigued, Dominic looked closer and noticed the Swiss coat of arms emblazoned in the corner. His expression changed from contempt to tension, but he quickly tried to hide it. Whispers grew among the guests. "What's on that paper?" they murmured. Clara stepped forward, fixing her gaze on the tycoon. "This note is proof that you never knew who I really am," she declared. And in that instant, the audience knew they were about to witness the biggest twist of the evening. While all eyes were fixed on Dominic Harlow and the note in his hands, Lucas Rivera's innocent voice rang out again. "I can read this, sir. It's written in German, isn't it?" The entire room held its breath. Some guests laughed again, calling it childish nonsense, but others looked at each other in surprise. How could a 12-year-old boy, the son of a hotel maid, recognize a language that not even Dominic's own lawyers had been able to decipher? Marina, desperate, tried to pull her son back, but he stood firm, looking directly at the tycoon. The innocence of his words rang truer than any rehearsed speeches from the adults in the room. Dominic, trying to maintain his superiority, let out a nervous laugh and held the note out to the boy. "Then read it, little genius." The audience held their breath. Clara watched in silence, her heart racing, unsure if Lucas truly understood what was written. The boy took a deep breath and began translating, with a near-perfect accent. "We confirm the release of $950 million from the Mendez-Harlow account, in the name of the legal heir, Clara Mendez." The hall erupted in murmurs, followed by expressions of shock. Many guests rose from their chairs, unable to believe what they had just heard. The note was no ordinary piece of paper. It was an official document from a Swiss bank. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, as if a heavy burden had finally been lifted. The truth, hidden for years, was now unexpectedly exposed from the mouth of a child. The guests looked at her in a completely different way. She was no longer the nameless seamstress, but someone with the power to change the family's destiny. Dominic, pale, tried to snatch the note back from the boy's hands, but it was too late. The journalists' cameras were already capturing every second of the scene, and, as the tycoon tried to hide his panic, Clara stepped forward and declared firmly, "Now everyone knows why you should never have despised me." The room fell silent, aware that the humiliation had switched sides, and that the night was just beginning. The ballroom of the Aurora Grand Hotel fell into absolute silence after Lucas Rivera's words. It was as if even the crystal chandeliers suspended above the heads of the elite had stopped shining. The amount printed on the ticket, $950 million, was not just a figure, but a direct blow to the Harlow family's pride. Guests who had been laughing at Clara minutes before now exchanged awkward glances, some even whispering nervously, "Is this real? Is she the heiress?" The journalists, ecstatic, were already preparing their cameras to capture every detail of this unexpected scandal. Clara stood erect, breathing deeply, aware that her life would never be the same. Behind her, Adrian, her cowardly fiancé, remained silent, unable to defend the woman he was supposed to love. Dominic Harlow, for the first time in decades, lost the color in his face. His hands trembled slightly as he held the note, and his mask of authority began to crack before everyone's eyes. The tycoon, who prided himself on never being surprised, was being unmasked by a woman he had scorned and a 12-year-old boy who had dared to speak when everyone else had fallen silent. "This proves nothing," Dominic shouted, trying to regain control, but his voice came out louder than he intended, betraying his nervousness. The guests glanced at each other, realizing that the patriarch's wall of power was not as solid as it seemed. Clara, her eyes teary but firm, stared at him silently, conveying more authority than any words could express. The mood in the hall changed radically. The elite, previously complicit in the laughter, now seemed fearful, as if they had witnessed the beginning of a historic downfall. And it was then that Harold Vexley, the arrogant partner, tried to step forward, saying loudly, "This must be a misunderstanding, ladies and gentlemen. The boy doesn't know what he's talking about." But Lucas, innocent and firm, replied, "I only read what was written." Once again, shock swept through the room like an invisible wave. The audience realized that the truth could no longer be hidden, and everyone anxiously awaited Clara's next move. After all, what would she do now that the entire farce had been revealed? The note had already caused enough shock, but Clara Mendez knew that simply reading it wouldn't be enough. It was time to reveal a truth buried for years. With firm steps, she approached Dominic Harlow, who was still trying to hide his panic in front of the audience. "Do you want to know who I really am?" she said in a clear voice that echoed through the silent hall. Camera flashes illuminated her face as she continued. "My mother, Isabella Mendez, was the true partner who financed the Harlow family's first investments. Without her money, none of you would be here today." A murmur of shock spread among the guests. Some vaguely remembered the name, but never knew the truth. Clara wasn't just a seamstress. She was the daughter of the woman who had laid the foundations of the Harlow empire. Dominic, trying to regain control, let out a bitter laugh. "Cheap lies from a desperate woman," he declared, but his voice lacked the same firmness as before. Clara then looked directly at the partners and guests and added, "The documents are in the Swiss bank, in my name, and now everyone knows it. What was once a secret is now proof. You humiliated me by not having a last name, but this entire hall owes its wealth to the blood and sweat of my family." The silence that followed his words was more powerful than any argument. The weight of the revelation crushed Dominic's arrogance as he watched his authority crumble in front of his own allies. The tycoon's pride seemed to have been stripped away in public. Meanwhile, Lucas Rivera watched with wide eyes, unable to fully grasp the scale of what he had helped expose. Marina, his mother, wept softly, proud and frightened at the same time. The guests were no longer laughing. Many were visibly uncomfortable, as if they were witnessing a historical piece that would change the course of their family forever. Some began to back away from Dominic, muttering disapproval. Clara lifted her chin, no longer a victim, but the protagonist of the evening. The question hung in the air like a thunderclap ready to explode. What would Dominic do now that the whole world knew he had built his fortune on a stolen secret? The entire room seemed suffocated by silence, until one of the senior advisors, Victor Langford, stood and said in a choked voice, "So it's true. We built our empire on the Mendez family's money." The sentence sounded like a hammer hitting Dominic Harlow's reputation. Some guests looked away, others stared at Clara with a mixture of shame and respect. For many there, the revelation wasn't just shocking, it was an open wound, exposing decades of ingratitude. Clara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her mother's memories. She remembered the nights Isabella Mendez would sew until her fingers bled, believing the sacrifice would open doors that were now closing before her. The irony was painful. Her mother had sustained the Harlow's greatness, but in return, Clara had received only humiliation. Dominic Harlow tried to speak, but his voice was shaky, unlike the relentless tone everyone knew. "This doesn't change anything. The past is the past," he stammered, but no one seemed convinced. Every glance turned toward him carried judgment. Some partners murmured among themselves, wondering what else Dominic might have hidden over the years. Clara seized the moment and took a step forward, staring him down firmly. "The past is the foundation of the present, Mr. Harlow. Without my mother's courage, your business wouldn't exist. And the way you treated me today is proof of your ingratitude." The impact of her words sank like a sentence, and Dominic felt his authority slip away like sand through his fingers. The scene that had once seemed like a public victory to him was turning into an irreversible defeat. At the back of the room, Harold Vexley tried to regain control, whispering to other partners that Clara was making up stories to take advantage of the situation. But Lucas Rivera, with his disarming innocence, interrupted again, saying aloud, "I read what was written, sir. It was there, very clear." The simple words of a child became more powerful than any elaborate argument. Journalists captured the moment, and the cameras turned to Dominic, who could no longer hide the sweat on his forehead. The tycoon, who until minutes ago had seemed unshakable, now found himself surrounded by the truth and the pressure from everyone. The public wanted more, and Clara knew the next step would be decisive, revealing not only the ingratitude, but also the fraud hidden in the contracts that sustained the Harlow Empire. The murmurs turned into waves of indignation, and Dominic Harlow's posture was no longer that of a man in control, but of someone cornered. He tried to smile, but it seemed forced, almost a plea for mercy. It was at that moment that Clara Mendez took another step forward, tightly holding the bouquet she had nearly dropped minutes before. Her voice echoed clearly, "You ridiculed me for being the daughter of a seamstress. But now everyone knows that this family's wealth was born of the sacrifice you chose to hide." The room erupted in timid applause from some guests, while others, embarrassed, fell silent in the face of the truth. The woman who minutes before had been the butt of jokes now commanded the center of attention, transforming shame into power. Harold Vexley, desperately trying to turn the situation around, raised his voice. "This is nothing but a cheap shot. That letter could be forged, and this woman has nothing but words." But that's when Lucas Rivera approached again, gripping the hem of the tycoon's jacket and saying with disarming simplicity, "I read every word, sir. It said the account is hers." Nervous laughter echoed in the room, but it wasn't mockery, but rather disbelief at a boy's courage. Marina, embarrassed, tried to pull him back, but it was too late. The journalists focused their cameras on the boy, transforming him into the symbol of the evening. Dominic, red with rage and helplessness, took a step forward as if to reprimand the boy, but backed away when he saw all eyes on him. Silence fell once more over the room, as everyone awaited Clara's final reaction. Her eyes were fixed on Dominic, and her expression was no longer one of pain, but of quiet triumph. "You humiliated me in front of everyone, but tonight will be marked not by the shame of the rejected bride, but by the fall of the Harlow Empire," she said firmly. The impact was devastating. Those words echoed through the hotel corridors and would be repeated in every newspaper the next day. Dominic tried to open his mouth to respond, but couldn't. His throat was dry, and his face betrayed the fear he had never shown in public. And while the tycoon remained silent in front of everyone, Clara and Lucas became the voices that would forever change the narrative of that family. As his father's empire crumbled before everyone's eyes, Adrian Harlow, the groom who had remained silent, became the target of the most intense stares in the room. Guests murmured among themselves, wondering how he could allow such humiliation to befall the woman he was supposed to defend. Clara slowly turned to face him, the disappointment in her gaze more cutting than any words. "You knew everything?" she asked quietly, but it echoed in the general silence. Adrian swallowed, unable to answer. The cowardice that had kept him silent now became his sentence. The image of the confident heir, poised to take over the family business, had been shattered in minutes before the elite who had previously fawned over him. Dominic tried to find a way out, but with every word Clara spoke, the family's authority crumbled. And Adrian, cornered, made the choice that would condemn him forever. He pointed at Clara and said, his voice trembling, I didn't know any of this. If I had, I would never have allowed you into my life." The entire room gasped. The blow was not only cruel, it was confirmation that he had never been there for her. What should have sounded like defense became the biggest mistake of his life, for it revealed his weakness and ingratitude. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the betrayal of the man who claimed to love her, but when she opened them again, her posture was that of someone no longer suffering, but growing stronger in contempt. "You didn't have to allow anything, Adrian. I didn't need your permission to exist, much less to be who I am," Clara replied, her voice firm and filled with dignity. Her words echoed through the hall like a verdict, and many guests rose in subdued applause. Adrian, ashamed, lowered his head, knowing he would never regain the trust or respect of Clara or of those present. And as the grooms sank into silence, Clara's figure grew before everyone, becoming a symbol of strength amidst the chaos. The hook was clear. Adrian's downfall was not just personal, it was the harbinger of the Harlow family's complete ruin. The audience eagerly awaited Clara's next move, and the final blow that was yet to come. Everyone expected Clara Mendez, faced with the Harlow family's collapse, to back down or remain silent, allowing the engagement to be renegotiated somehow. But she surprised everyone. She firmly raised her bouquet and, in a clear, resolute voice, declared, "This wedding is not off for Dominic Harlow. It's off for me." The entire room reacted in shock. Her words completely turned the tables. The woman who had been humiliated moments before was now dictating the rules in front of the elite. Some guests clapped their hands over their mouths, unable to believe anyone would have the courage to confront the Harlows in such a way. It was the twist no one expected. Clara wasn't just defending herself, she was destroying the family's image of power in front of everyone. Dominic Harlow, red with rage, took a step forward and tried to regain his authoritative voice. "You don't know what you're doing, insolent girl. Without my approval, you have nothing." But his words sounded weak, almost pathetic, compared to Clara's strength. She smiled slightly, a smile that carried years of pain transformed into dignity, and replied, "I don't need your approval. I never have. What you call my fortune was born of my family's sacrifice, and I will never bow to ingratitude." The impact was devastating. Some businessmen applauded quietly, while others rose to leave, ashamed to remain as witnesses to the Harlow's collapse. Dominic, for the first time, seemed small before a woman he had underestimated. Adrian, the rejected groom, tried to approach, mumbling in confused words, "Clara, wait, we can work this out." But she held up her hand, firmly stopping him. "There's nothing more to be done. You had the chance to defend me, and you chose to remain silent. Today, you don't just lose a bride. You lose the right to walk beside me." The silence that followed her words was even more deafening than the applause. The decision was made, irreversible, and every look in the room reflected respect or admiration for her courage. However, the night held something even greater. The outside world was about to discover what had just happened, and the scandal wouldn't be confined to those gilded walls. For a few seconds, the room remained in a dense silence, as if everyone was trying to process what had just happened. Then, suddenly, the unexpected happened. Applause began to echo from the back. At first timid, then growing, until it turned into a collective roar that filled the Aurora Grand Hotel. Journalists, business people, guests, and even employees who had been discreetly observing surrendered to Clara Mendez's courage. What should have been the greatest embarrassment of her life became a public triumph, and each round of applause felt like a blow to the Harlow's reputation. Clara stood firm, unsmiling, but her eyes betrayed the emotion of finally being recognized not as a victim, but as a protagonist. Dominic Harlow watched the scene with hatred and helplessness. His name, once synonymous with respect and fear, was now associated with humiliation and ingratitude. Some partners began to distance themselves from him, aware that supporting a declining tycoon could ruin their own businesses. Others took the opportunity to approach Clara with calculated glances, already envisioning new alliances. The Harlow Empire, built on silence and arrogance, was crumbling before Dominic's very eyes. And the most painful thing was realizing that the downfall had not come from a powerful competitor or a corporate betrayal, but from a woman he deemed insignificant, and from a boy who had dared to speak out. Amid the deafening applause, Lucas Rivera looked at Clara with pure admiration, not fully understanding that he had become a central part of a story that would be covered in every newspaper in the world. Marina, his mother, wept quietly, proud of her son, but also frightened by the scale of the incident. Clara then reached out to Lucas and pulled him close, hugging him in front of everyone. "It was your courage that paved this path," she said to him, her voice low, but captured by nearby cameras. The audience cheered even more loudly at the scene, transforming the moment into a symbol of poetic justice. But the outside world had yet to see anything. The scandal was about to spill beyond the hotel walls, and the press would make a splashy headline out of it. Amidst the tumult of applause and cameras flashing non-stop, the focus began to shift. It wasn't just Clara Mendez who was drawing attention, but also little Lucas Rivera, who still held the note as if it were a simple piece of paper, oblivious to the significance of it. Journalists approached, asking his name, who his parents were, how he had learned to read German. Marina, his mother, tried to protect him, embarrassed and frightened by so much exposure, but it was impossible to stem the growing tide. Images of the brave boy were already streaming across cell phone screens, broadcast live by guests who recorded everything. Lucas's innocence, contrasting with the Harlow's arrogance, became the true symbol of the evening. Dominic Harlow, watching the scene, felt a pang of despair. The narrative had slipped from his control, and now a boy of only 12 occupied the center that had always been his. It was no longer his word against Clara's. It was the pure, unquestionable voice of a child confirming what was written. Trying to regain ground, Dominic raised his hand and shouted, "That boy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just a maid's son." But instead of weakening Lucas's image, his words had the opposite effect. One of the journalists retorted loudly, "Maybe that's exactly what makes it all the more true. He has nothing to gain, only to lose." The cameras captured Dominic's face tense, defeated by simple logic. Clara then knelt beside Lucas, placing her hand on his shoulder and looking into the cameras. The truth doesn't choose age or social status. It simply appears, even when everyone tries to hide it. The hall erupted in applause again, and that image, the jilted bride embracing the maid's son, would be splashed across headlines across the country. Marina, overcome with emotion, shed a few tears, realizing that her son had become the voice of something much bigger than either of them could have imagined. But while Clara and Lucas grew stronger together, Dominic was already planning his next desperate move. Because, for a man accustomed to never losing, admitting defeat was not an option. The press, already positioned in front of the improvised lectern in the hall, began to ask Dominic Harlow sharp questions. "Is it true that your fortune was born from the Mendez family's funds?" a reporter asked incisively. The tycoon, sweating under the intense lights, tried to force a smile, but his voice trembled. "These accusations are nothing more than opportunistic fabrications," he declared, his eyes avoiding direct contact with the cameras. The audience sensed his nervousness, and the journalists didn't ease up. "What about the Swiss document? What did the boy read?" Dominic stammered, trying to divert the subject. His unbeatable demeanor had vanished. Before the cameras, he was no longer an economic titan, but a cornered man, unable to sustain his own lies. While Dominic stumbled over his words, Clara Mendez stood firm beside Lucas Rivera, needing no words. Her presence was enough to contrast with the tycoon's weakness. The partners who had once revered him now whispered among themselves, some already considering publicly withdrawing to protect their reputations. Harold Vexley, sensing his allies' fragility, tried to speak up to salvage the situation, but was ignored by the reporters, who now only had eyes for Dominic. The cornered tycoon raised his voice in despair. "You don't understand. Everything I've built is my merit." But the phrase rang hollow, echoing in the room like a confession that the truth had already won. It was at that moment that one of the journalists broadcasting live announced the news circulating on social media. "Harlow Holdings shares are plummeting right now." A buzz filled the room. The empire Dominic had spent decades building was beginning to crumble before the world in real time. The tycoon put his hand to his forehead, visibly shaken, and let out a sigh of defeat that was picked up by the microphones. The scene would go viral minutes later, being shared as a symbol of the collapse of a man who seemed untouchable. But Clara wasn't finished yet, and her next move would show that this night wasn't just about exposing a lie, but about building something new on top of the ruins left by the Harlows. The room was still buzzing with whispers about the precipitous drop in Harlow Holdings shares when Clara Mendez stepped forward, imposing silence once again. Her steady gaze swept over every face present, from the stunned business people to the excited journalists, until it settled on Dominic Harlow, who now seemed smaller than ever. "Today you laughed at me, as if I were invisible. But know this, true invisibility has always been in the sacrifices my mother made to sustain this empire. Now, I will no longer be silent. I will honor her name and build something none of you can tear down." The cameras captured every word, turning her voice into an instant headline. The impact was immediate. Some of Clara's most influential partners, sensing the Harlows' downfall, discreetly approached Clara, offering support. But to everyone's surprise, she raised her hand and said, "I don't need those who exploit their downfall to feign loyalty. My alliance will not be with you." Then, in an unexpected gesture, Clara pulled Lucas Rivera and his mother, Marina, to the center of the room, placing them beside her. This boy's courage revealed the truth everyone tried to hide. "If I'm going to build something new, I want people like him and his mother to be with me. People who know the value of truth and honest work." The audience reacted with astonishment, followed by emotional applause. It was the consecration of a new power, different from that shaped by the Harlows' arrogance. Dominic, stunned, tried to shout, "You can't do this. Without my name, without my influence, you're going nowhere." But his words sounded like the last wail of a collapsing empire. Clara was unfazed. "I don't need your name, Dominic. Mine is enough, and everyone in this room knows it." The silence that followed her words was devastating to the tycoon. For the first time, Clara Mendez wasn't just the rejected bride. She was the woman who had defeated an empire before the world's witnesses. And there was something more. The future awaited her, ready to be written with new alliances and new symbols. The audience wanted to know, what would Clara do with the power she now held? Months after that historic night at the Aurora Grand Hotel, newspapers still splashed headlines about the collapse of the Harlow family. Dominic Harlow's arrogance and Adrian's cowardice became examples of how hubris can destroy even the most powerful empires. Harlow Holdings shares never recovered, and its closest partners abandoned ship in search of new paths. Meanwhile, a name that had once been a source of scorn now resonated as a symbol of strength: Clara Mendez. The jilted bride had become the woman who single-handedly took on a millionaire dynasty and prevailed. Her image graced magazine covers and television shows, not as a victim, but as the architect of a new era. Clara kept her promise. She created the Isabella Mendez Foundation, named after her mother, focusing on supporting invisible women and children without opportunities. On the opening stage, alongside her, stood Lucas Rivera and Marina, recognized as a fundamental part of that turnaround. The boy, who had only dared to read a note, now received scholarships funded by businessmen who would previously have ignored him without hesitation. Marina, previously an anonymous employee in luxury hotels, began coordinating social projects within the foundation. What had begun as a night of humiliation transformed into a movement capable of changing destinies. The audience, which had once laughed, now bowed before Clara's legacy and the courage of a boy who dared to speak when everyone else was silent. And in the simple room where he still lived with his mother, Lucas kept the newspaper headline from that fateful night in his worn backpack. Maid's son unmasks billion-dollar empire. For him, it was more than a memory. It was proof that even the smallest voices can echo throughout the world. Clara, looking out over the horizon of the foundation's new building, knew that the power she had gained came not from the money revealed in the note, but from the truth no one could deny. The Harlow Empire had crumbled, but in its place had risen something far greater, a legacy of courage, dignity, and justice. And so, the story of the jilted bride became eternal as the unexpected victory no one could ever erase. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel now, activate the bell, and share. This way, you'll help us bring you more moving stories that impact and transform lives. Thank you so much for your support.